very, very quickly. 2 years. Stanford University adopting it, IBM adopting it, and today he's going to talk to you about creating not a moment, but a movement. Ladies and gentlemen, please make some noise. Well, we're going to remove this table first because he needs some space. He's going to be working this stage to tell you how he went about starting that movement. So as soon as this is off, we're going to have him on once again. You'll have time to ask him some questions. But you know what it's like. When you come up with an idea, you come up with a business, it's difficult enough dealing with it in your own country and growing it in your own country. Now, having to deal with different people, different cultures, different continents, and getting them to buy into the same concept is something that boggles, I think, a lot of people's minds, and hopefully you'll be able to unravel that for you today. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's make some noise for Gary Whitehill. Thank you.
Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Good? All right. So, what we're going to start off with is a little exercise. Building a movement is about creation. And the funny thing about when you grow up is you forget how to create. But when you're a kid, when you're 5 years old, like I was in that picture at Disneyland with my mother, the world is unbridled. There's a lot of naivety, but you're willing and open to do anything. This entire presentation is about creating a reality that isn't there yet and inspiring people to follow you. So I want you to take 20 seconds. Think back to when you were 5 years old. Think real hard. What were you doing when you were 5 years old that you remember, that made you smile? So the rest of this presentation is structured around that fun, that lightheartedness, that belief in creation, and that you can create your own reality. Right now in the world, life feels a lot like this. You're just going with the blinders on, you have a myopic view of the world, and you're just trying to get through. More than ever before, you're working harder for less. That's why you see movements springing up all over the world. That's why you're seeing Hong Kong. That's why you saw Ferguson. And that's why you saw Occupy Wall Street many years ago. Because they're all going after the same things. The social structures in the way in which this world works are fundamentally broken. And we're going to talk through what that looks like and why movements are so important to the future of our world. So Buckminster Fuller had a really good quote when it comes to movements. You never change things with the existing reality. And that's a fact. It doesn't happen. You have to envision a future that is not here yet and inspire a tribe to follow you and invite them along the way. And today is what we're going to talk about is exactly what Bucky said roughly about 50 years ago. So a little bit about me. My background is in scaling a global movement to 4 continents in 2 years. And I had my team do a little history for me. I was curious, how many companies since 1850 have scaled to 4 continents? Not in 2 years, but just scaled to 4 continents. Any guesses how many companies? Just throw out a number. 5? 0? 50. The actual number is roughly 160. Or sorry, 960. It's below 1,000 companies that have ever done it in the history of the world. It's 100,000th of a percent. I'm fortunate to stand in front of you today because I've gone through the trials, the tribulations, the good and the bad that comes with doing exactly something that less than 1,000 founders have done in their entire history since 1850, in the past 164 years. So what is a movement? A movement is 2 things, and it does 2 things. Number 1, it mobilizes humanity around a common purpose and goal. Number 2, it enables possibility that is not yet realized and potential that is not yet realized by people who have a fundamental belief, whatever that belief is. I travel around the world, and journalists, CEOs, government officials, they always say, Gary, what is it? What's the secret? How do you build a global movement? What's the one thing? What's the secret? And I always say the same thing. Just like in startups, just like in investing, there is no secret. There's a process, there are trends, but there is no secret. So I always tell them there's 3 trends that you find in any global movement, in any successful global movement. Number 1, the leader, the fundamental underpinning of that movement, believes in here, whatever that belief, whatever that vision is much more important, it is much more powerful than whatever the reality is outside of themselves at the current moment. And the reason that visceral belief matters so much is because it enables that person to transcend the mental, the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual boundaries that oppress most of us as humans. They literally see the world through a different lens than you do. Number 2, humans have this tendency to wait and worry. I call it the double W. We wait and worry. We look for somebody to go first. We don't know if it's the right time. We have excuses. We're looking for somebody to give us the answer. The leaders who make a difference in the world and create successful global movements start right now. Third, leaders who transform the world through a global movement say what they mean and mean what they say. Every single word that comes out of their mouth is their personal truth. And that personal truth creates magnetism. And that magnetism may start slow and it may start fast. But either way, if you speak your own personal truth, it is only a matter of time until your vision for the world becomes reality. So the rest of this presentation is about how you can tactically do that. This is the structure we're going to go through. It's a pie chart. It's broken into 8 steps. The first 5 steps. When you build a movement, how you start, it all has to be structured around what you believe personally. The second part is structured around what a successful movement looks like. Just like in a business, you cannot build a successful movement unless it comes from here. If your core operating and organizing principle is not why you do what you do, as Simon Sinek says, what is your passion, what is your purpose, what's your cause, and what's your belief? If that is not where you're operating from, you will never get to step 6 through 8 because the steps before it are not anchored. So step 1, when you start a global movement, you have to build a personality for whatever your vision is. So it's about who we are. Second, it's about what do we want? What is your purpose? Why are you doing what you are doing? What is that visceral belief, that visceral vision that you have in some future state that is not current, but that you believe needs to be there? Third, what's your story? Humans engage in stories. They engage in why you do it, not what and not how. How do you get personal success? What's your mission and what's your vision? Seems simple to come up with, but unless you start with why, and unless you have a story, it's very hard to come up with that. The next step is around, is it possible? Most of the time, what you believe deep down inside is possible. It's just a matter of how you get there. So it's smart to start with a standard analysis of what trends are actually going on in the world, because it's not very smart to go in blindsided and without at least a little bit of information. It's good to be naive in some ways, trust me, but not too naive. And when you build a standard analysis, what happens is you understand what your core value proposition is to both your followers and to the world. Off of your value proposition, what's built is your unique ability in the market. Because you need a niche. You need a story that is different than everybody else in the world. Because if it sounds like somebody else, it is somebody else. As folks like to say, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it might not be a duck, but to everybody else, it's a duck. And you know what happens to ducks? They don't fly. You know why they don't fly? Because all they know how to do is swim. Problem with swimming is you don't take off. And a global movement only takes off if you're unique. Last but not least, what are you benchmarking? What are you monitoring? There has to be something how you are going to decide whether you're being successful or not. It could be a million different things. And it doesn't have to be the typical things you see in your MBA course or you had in your strategy class. It could be engagement, employee engagement, happiness, right? Tony Hsieh is a perfect example at Zappos of monitoring happiness. So the first step in making sure that this happens is you have to build a tribe. In building a tribe, there's a lot of organizing principles that are important because these are the people who will follow you no matter what, wherever you go in the entire world. When we built Entrepreneur Week, and even still today, there are folks from 2008, 2009 who still call me, who still give me updates about why they do what they do, because they believed in my vision that every single human being deserves a realistic opportunity to create. And Entrepreneur Week was about giving human beings the access to those tools and resources. And certain people believed enough in that. They asked the right questions about themselves and about me. Were we aligned? Were our visions aligned? And they were, because I understood what Entrepreneur Week was about. It wasn't just an idea. It was never just an idea. It was a reality. Second, reinstate imagination. Building movements either constructs or reconstructs a reality. It's important that you understand that. It is not just something that you plop on the table. You're either reconstructing something that is already there, or you're creating something that isn't there yet. Once again, it's all about creation. Penetrate despair. Every single prophetic vision did one thing really well. It didn't ask if it could be implemented. It just did. Remember, right now is the perfect time. Not later, not before, right now. Next, timing is key. At any given time, in any given moment in human history, there is always something that could be better, whatever it is. It's just a matter of if that better matters enough to you and matters enough that you're willing to sacrifice for the betterment of humanity. It's not a matter of if. It's just a matter of when and why. Repeat business versus loyalty. One of the things that great leaders do is they understand loyalty. They understand how to build a following that will follow you for years and years to come. They understand how to viscerally engage somebody deep down inside to where they'll call you late at night with their problems, whether it's personal or professional. They promote weight. It's my funky little analogy, but we're all in this together. Great leaders never say I. They say we. Great leaders come from a sense of power and purpose that is about all, not about one. And if you go back and you look and you replay some of the team sports that are out there, and you start listening to some of the athletes and stars, check how many times they say I. And the more you start to listen for how many times your employees or your investors or whoever it is says I, the more you know it's against that principle. So the attributes of a movement. This right here is how corporations think about building their businesses. What they care about is scale and efficiency. That's the core of their business. And what they do is they then take the core of their business and they move into the tribes and the niches. They don't understand how to viscerally engage folks like you in this room. They know how to do operations. They don't know how to talk about why. They know how to talk about what. But here's the problem. All they're after is money. All big companies are good at, and big bloated organizations, and organizations that do not have a core organizing principle around why they do what they do, have a core organizing principle about money. But the problem with money is it's not a scalable structure. In any human system, money can never be the core organizing principle. And if you think about that for a moment, it's pretty clear to understand why we are where we are as a world right now. What it is about culture. It's about solving deep-rooted social challenges. It's about coming from the heart, doing something with your hands, and then infusing into people's minds. Because it takes the longest to re-hardwire somebody's brain. And the reason why is because we're hardwired from 100,000 years ago, folks. And the last update we had was 5,000 years ago, this nice little gray membrane up here called the neocortex, which is how we got rational emotional thinking. So what does a grassroots movement look like? The grassroots movement looks at scale and efficiency as a bolt-on. That's the last thing a movement is worried about. What the core is the fringes. Movements are all about fringe thinking, the future, a reality that doesn't exist, something that you must construct or reconstruct, or even deconstruct. And here's the psychology behind movements. People want a sense of purpose. It has very little to do with external incentive. Daniel Pink has proven that time and again. Humanity cares about three things: a sense of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Those are the three things humans care about. Fact. And when you start from a tribal niche, you hit those three right on the head. The other motivation, vision. An intensity communicated. This is a set of passionate principles. It's about building a tribe, folks. Because movements are only scalable when structured around cultural context. If you don't have the courage to talk about why you do what you do, if you do not have the courage to speak what you feel in here every single day, it won't be successful. Great leaders are successful because they speak from a cultural perspective. Defining scale. If you look at this graph, it's a very short timeline to get to a local movement, right? Your friends, your family. A regional movement up to the state or state level, the regional level, takes a little bit longer. The national level, what you start to see is a massive fragmentation. And then the international level is actually off the scale in terms of how hard it is to do. The reason I didn't map certain movements onto here, such as Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln, what we did at Entrepreneur Week, is because it's not about what we did in the past, it's what you envision you want yours to be. Do you want yours to go up and to the right? Do you want yours to go horizontal, back, up? Because it's not about me, it's about you. The reason you're sitting in this room is because you believe in being able to do that in some way, shape, or form at some time. As Daniel Pink said, freedom, autonomy, and a sense of purpose. This graph is something that you should take a picture of, print out, and put in 3 places. Next to your bed, where you brush your teeth, and the door you go in and out of the most. Because that's the only way that subconsciously you will come over the hardwiring that is stuck in your brain right now. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is the steeper the curve, the faster you go up and to the right, the more vulnerable the curve is. We learned this from Occupy Wall Street. If you don't step back and build the right infrastructure around your movement, it becomes extremely vulnerable to other movements or other agendas. And we're going to talk through some of the ways that you can solidify your vision for the world. And it comes through setting culture. How do you enable humanity into a supportive, and collective action? So here's where most people start. You start low on a segment focus, and you start low on a product focus. You know you're passionate about something, but you don't know where, and you don't know what it looks like. This is what probably 95% of movements turn into. You understand what the product should be, but it's all one-offs. That doesn't make it scalable. And what happens is, when you don't make something scalable, when you don't empower other people to help you, when you don't decentralize the vision that you have for reality, the challenge is you just run out of steam. You run out of gas. You burn out. The other thing that happens is you get really segmented. You know where the niche is, but you don't know what the heck to build. Where you want to be is, once again, up and to the right. How do you enable the world? How do you have perfect segment focus and perfect product focus? That's what we're going to talk about right now. So how do you enable leverage? How do you enable the world? Well, there's 3 different steps. What happens is when you start a movement, you start with the mothership. That's the holding company. That's you. You are the one who is the enabler. You and your team. You are the ones who quantify and qualify everything that happens in your organization. What you next do is you build out a semi-autonomous group of local curators. At Entrepreneur Week, we started with Greece, Chile, Brazil, and we empowered them through a bunch of guidelines. They were our champions on the ground. They allowed us to scale into countries that we knew nothing about. We knew what the product should be, we knew what the structure should be, but we didn't understand the local context. That's what those champions allowed us to do. And what the champions do is then they enable the people on the ground, the tribe, the catalysts, the hundreds of thousands of people that believe in that irrational future vision. How you enable and create leverage is your systems and your processes. It seems really simple to just create a global movement of people who believe that everybody should create, right? In words, that sounds pretty simple. I believe everybody should be able to create. But guess what? That impact can't be replicated easily, because replicating this structure and finding people that believe what you believe is not easy. Just because there's 8 billion people in the world doesn't mean it's easy to recreate. In fact, that makes it 10 times harder, because there's more white noise in the world. Second, organizing is a process. You have to create long-term campaigns that have well-timed waves. Great leaders make sure to time every single thing that they do successively, and it builds off of one another like a snowball. What happens is when you're really passionate, you want to execute, 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 and just let it all out. Problem is, it takes time for people to absorb what you're saying to them. It takes time for them to be able to change their own brain and understand what's going on. A role for all. Great leaders understand that no matter whether it's a 5-year-old kid or a 70-year-old man, whether it's somebody who works at a newspaper or it's somebody who works in a technology company, there is a role for them in the movement. Great leaders understand that it's their job to build that infrastructure and turn them into a champion, whatever that looks like. The goal is to lower transaction costs and network barriers. This structure right here, folks, is how every successful global movement has been started, because it lowers the barrier to entry and it lowers transaction costs between myself and other people who believe what I believe. And what we then collectively began to believe is a movement called Entrepreneur Week. Why traditional structures don't work. This is my favorite slide. This is how it works right now. You got this big hierarchical way that these corporations work. All the people in the company sit at the bottom in terms of power, and then there's a few jamokes at the top who decide everything else. That seems really efficient, doesn't it? Of course not. So what happens? What happens when you have this type of structure? This is what happens. You have one-to-one interactions. What if every day you woke up and you had to do every single thing the same way for the rest of your life? How many of you have seen the movie Groundhog Day? That's what this enables. The same thing every day. Your life is monotone, commonplace, boring. It's a slow death, exactly. Because it's based in a power structure. It's based in force. It leads to aggression, domination, power, conquest, rigidness, and denseness. Last time I checked, if you take those 6 attributes and you map them against just about any power structure that in history has done the wrong things for the wrong reasons, they map to those. So do corporations. Here's how movements work and why they work. Movements are horizontal. They are not hierarchical. They go sideways. They empower everyone, everywhere, to do what they believe is the right thing to do. And when that happens, something really funny happens. The network effect. All of a sudden, you have network-driven interactions. You have a power law that happens. It's not 1 people, it's not 10 people. All of a sudden, it becomes 100,000, and then it becomes 10 million. It doesn't go on a linear trajectory like it does in a power structure. It hits an exponential curve. What that leads to is progressiveness, individuality, freedom, and most importantly, in my opinion, is empathy. At the root of most of the problems we have today in humanity is the fact that we cannot look each other in the eye and understand why the other person believes what they believe. It doesn't mean they're right, but it means that you could understand why they believe what they believe. You can have empathy for why they believe that, whether it's right or wrong. In today's world, it's rigid. It's power. All the things that corporations are. Thankfully, the world's going much more towards the way in which movements are structured. Here's another way to look at organizations. Big power structures, once again, stick in the middle of the bell curve. They're reactive, stagnant, dense, heavy. All the things that make you die, whether it's a company or a person. It is no coincidence, folks, that when you look at the health of our world, whether it's us as humans, whether it's environmentally, whether it's socially, why right now it's reactive, stagnant, heavy, dense? Because the world is moving back over to nimble and proactive. The world is going to go through a transition that is tribal, that is based on cultural context, and that is more than ever based on movements. This is another way to look at what a movement does. In any situation, this line right here is the bandwidth of the company by itself. At some point, it flatlines. And it flatlines because there's only so much power and force that you can dictate in a structure. All of our systems are starting to figure that out, aren't they? And it's only a matter of time till every single one of them breaks. Roughly in about 2.5 to 3 years. That's when it's coming. When you enable a community, all of a sudden, as they get more sophisticated, as you empower them more, all of a sudden, you start to see the leverage graphically. You start to see why people want to be a part of what you do. Because they are irrational in their belief and will do whatever is necessary to make sure that that movement is successful. When you're based in a power structure, people just do their job and try and forget because they're dying inside. When you enable people, they'll do whatever you need, whenever you need it, why you need it. So some quick hit advice as we close for today. Number one, A movement is diverse. There are many paths to reach the same goals. There's not just one. That's why when folks always ask me, what is the secret? There is no secret. There's never a secret. There's no secret in building a company. There's no secret in getting funding. There's no secret in building a movement. There's principles. There's organizing principles and structures. What we've talked about today is how to be organized and how to be principled, and how to think about operationally building a movement. Talk about why. We have this tendency to be very combative as human beings. We talk about our competitors. It's easy to talk about the outside instead of what's here. We've lost talking about what's deep down inside. And what's deep down inside, folks, is creation. Every single one of you in your brains right now has something that you wish you could do in life, whatever it is. There is something you wish you could do and you could create. Talk about it. The next thing that happens in movements is you stop thinking like an MBA. It is not about a linear-driven spreadsheet. It's not about efficiency. It's not about profit. It's not about sales. If you have an MBA, I will guarantee you it is exponentially harder for you to build a movement. I'm a no-name kid from a no-name place, from a no-name university that got lucky. And I look at all these MBAs who try and analyze every little thing. You know why? Because they're stuck up here. That's why we're in a rigid, dense world right now, because we're all stuck in our heads instead of stuck in our hearts. And as foo-foo-y as that sounds, we've just talked about the roadmap of how you take the foo-foo-y supposedly in your heart and make it a real frickin' reality. Communicate. Be engaging instead of broadcasting. Don't tell people something, engage them. Ask them to join. Build great leaders. Use an intention map. The biggest learning lesson we had at Entrepreneur Week was that we were afraid to enable our champions to be too successful. Meaning, they were so good at what they did that they got hired by other corporations, or they decided to do whatever they decided to do because Entrepreneur Week was their platform. And the power in building an intention map for your champions means, once again, in your head right now, every single one of you has something that you wish would be an outcome in your life. It could be money, it could be a job, it could be whatever it is. It's my job as a leader to empower you to get there. Because if I help you get where you're going and you help the movement, sure, you move on, but you become an alumni of a very elite club. And when you become an alumni, you are the biggest champion possible. You are another clone of me as a leader. And that's the best thing you can actually enable. Here's how you ignite your movement in the next 24 hours. You want to make a difference in the world, folks? Here's how you do it. Envision your future. Put down your top 5 goals for the next year, 3 years, 5 years. Don't be realistic. Be audacious. Don't think inside the box. Nobody's going to see your list besides you. So write down what you actually truly believe. Then hold yourself accountable to it, because nobody else will. Architect a resource map. What do you have now, and what do you need? Because once you put things in writing, once you post them in those 3 places I told you, it's only a matter of time, folks, until it starts to happen. When you put things in writing, reality happens. Fact. That's just how the world works. Next, cultivate diversity. Engage people outside your tribe. There's a lot of people who won't believe what you believe. Those are the best people to talk to. You know why? Because you lead with empathy. What you want to do is you want to understand all the reasons why they don't believe what you believe. Because your job as a leader is this. You don't go at them. This is what we do right now. You step back, get force, and you bull rush somebody. Bull rush is BS. You just sidestep with empathy. You understand why people think what they believe, and you move forward. Last but not least, work on your pitch. What matters and why. In 15 seconds, talk about why you believe what you believe, whatever that irrational vision is. I believe that the future of humanity should be everybody deserves an equal opportunity to create. That's less than 10 seconds, folks. It's complicated in execution, but that's what I believe. Really quickly, this is the journey you're going to go through. It's very easy to follow only what you love. It's very easy to ideate, but you have no competence. Then what happens is, if you're a typical MBA, you can do a lot of things well because you're based in efficiency. Woohoo, great. But guess what? You have no commitment. You know why? Because you're stuck up here. Competence is mind, commitment is heart. Where you want to be is up and to the right, just like everything else we've shown in this presentation, folks. How you get there is a bridge of trust with your tribe. We've talked about how to build a tribe. Everything in a global movement comes down to building scalable and iterative synapse connections. What that means is empowering every single person who believes what you believe to do what you believe the reality should be in the world. This is the chart we went through, folks. When you break it down, it's all about peace, love, and passion. As much as you don't believe right now that it is, in the next 3 years, the world's going to go through a very big restructuring, and this will become central. We started out, that's where we ended up in the light. I wish you guys the best. Thank you very much.